They left her to die in the snow, not because she was weak, but because she was worthless. Or so they believed. Alara Voss, the white-haired Omega no one wanted, was supposed to freeze quietly in the mountain storm, forgotten like the countless others before her. But fate had different plans. When the most feared Alpha King in the north found her dying body half buried in the drifts, neither of them knew that one act of mercy would unravel centuries of lies, topple corrupt councils, and prove that the girl they abandoned was never an Omega at all. She was a queen. Stay until the end to see how she makes them all pay. Like this video and comment which city you're watching from. The wind howled like a living thing, tearing through the mountain pass with teeth of ice and claws of frozen air. Snow fell so thick that the world disappeared. Sky, earth, horizon, all swallowed into a writhing void of white. The caravan pressed forward, carts creaking under the weight of trade goods and dowries, horses snorting clouds of steam that vanished instantly into the storm. Inside the last wagon, pressed against burlap sacks that reeked of salt and old grain, Alara Voss sat perfectly still. She had learned long ago that stillness kept you invisible, that silence kept you safe. Her white hair, unusual, unsettling, the color of winter itself, was tucked beneath a threadbare hood. Her pale fingers were clasped in her lap, knuckles raw from cold. Around her the other Omegas whispered and wept, clutching thin blankets in each other for warmth. Alara did neither. She simply stared at the gap in the canvas where wind and snow leaked through, watching the storm with eyes the color of smoke. Gray, lifeless, empty. "Do you think he'll be kind?" one of the girls whispered, her voice trembling. "The Northern King?" "Kings are never kind," another replied bitterly. "Especially not to us." They were being delivered. That was the word the traders used, as if they were parcels or livestock. A caravan of Omegas bound for the northern territories promised to lords and chiefs, and in one case, a king. Political marriages, debt payments. Some, like Alara, had been sold by families who could no longer afford to keep them. Her own mother had cried when she signed the contract. Her father had not looked at her at all. "What about you?" The question cut through Alara's thoughts. One of the girls, young, maybe 16, was staring at her with wide, frightened eyes. "Aren't you scared?" Alara considered the question. Fear required hope. Hope required the belief that things could be better. She had neither. "No," she said quietly. The girl flinched as if slapped, then turned away. The others followed suit, huddling closer together and pointedly excluding Alara from their circle. She didn't mind. She was used to it. The white hair made people uneasy. The stillness made them think she was strange. And the fact that she never cried, never begged, never showed weakness, that made them hate her. Hours passed. The storm worsened. The caravan master, a grizzled beta named Torvin with a face like old leather, shouted orders from the front. "Keep moving, we're losing light." But the horses were struggling, their hooves slipping on ice. One of the carts lurched violently to the side, wheels grinding against stone. Then came the crack, a sound like thunder but sharper, closer. The entire caravan shuddered to a halt. "What was that?" someone screamed. Torvin swore viciously, dismounting to inspect the damage. When he returned, his expression was grim. "Axle's broken. We're stuck until we can fix it." "How long?" one of his men demanded. "Too long." Torvin glanced at the sky, where darkness was already beginning to fall. "We'll have to wait out the storm here, ration the supplies, stay warm." The Omegas exchanged terrified looks. Staying meant freezing. Everyone knew it. Torvin barked more orders and the men began securing the wagons, unhitching the horses, building makeshift shelters from canvas and rope. The Omegas were herded into the most protected wagon, the one with the least wind exposure. Except Alara. "Not you." Torvin's voice was flat, indifferent. He pointed to the broken cart, already half buried in snow. "You're lightest. You'll take less rations. Stay there." Alara's stomach dropped, but her face remained blank. "That cart is exposed. Then stay warm." He turned his back on her, already moving toward the others. She opened her mouth to protest, not out of fear but practicality. The broken cart had no walls, no cover. It was a death sentence. But one of the other Omegas met her gaze and smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. Maybe the storm will do us all a favor, the girl murmured, just loud enough for Alara to hear. And Alara understood. They wanted her gone. She had always been the unwanted one, the strange one. Too quiet, too cold, too wrong. Even among the outcasts, she was an outcast. So she said nothing. She climbed into the broken cart, pulled her knees to her chest, and wrapped her thin cloak around herself as tightly as she could. The wind bit through the fabric immediately, stealing the warmth from her skin. The caravan settled in for the night. Fires were lit, small, pitiful things that sputtered in the wind. Voices drifted through the storm, muffled and distant. No one checked on her. Hours passed. The cold stopped hurting after a while. It became something else, a numbness that spread through her limbs like water, slow and inevitable. Her fingers stopped trembling. Her breath came slower. She thought about her mother's tears, her father's silence, the way the marriage broker had looked at her, not with pity, but with distaste. Worthless, he'd muttered, but someone might take her if the price is low enough. Alara closed her eyes. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. She didn't hear the men arguing until it was too late. "We're not waiting anymore?" Torvin's voice, sharp and decisive. "The storm's getting worse. We take what we can carry and move now." "What about the Omegas?" someone asked. "We take the valuable ones. Leave the rest." A long pause. "All of them?" "No." Torvin's voice turned cold. "Just the white-haired one. She was barely worth the contract anyway. If anyone asks, we'll say she wandered off in the storm." Laughter, low and cruel. Alara's eyes snapped open. She tried to move, to stand, to shout, but her body wouldn't obey. The cold had already taken too much. Her limbs were lead. Her voice was a rasp. She heard the caravan packing up, heard the creak of wheels, the jingle of harnesses, heard voices fading into the storm. And then, silence. They left her. Not because the storm was too dangerous. Not because there was no choice. They left her because she didn't matter. Alara lay in the snow, staring up at the swirling white sky, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Anger. It flickered, weak, distant, almost nothing. But it was there. I don't want to die. The thought surprised her. She had accepted death so easily, the way she had accepted everything else in her life. But now, lying alone in the frozen dark, she realized something. She didn't want this. She wanted to fight, but her body wouldn't move. The cold was too deep now, wrapped around her bones like iron chains. Her vision blurred. Her heartbeat slowed. The storm raged on, and Alara Voss began to fade. She didn't know how long she lay there. Time lost meaning in the white silence. There was only cold, only emptiness. Then, warmth. It came suddenly, impossibly. A pressure against her chest. A sound, low, rhythmic. A heartbeat that wasn't hers. Her eyes fluttered open. A face loomed above her, half-shadowed in the storm. Sharp features carved from stone. Dark hair plastered to a scarred forehead. Eyes like winter itself. Pale, cold, and utterly unreadable. An alpha. No, not just an alpha. The scent hit her like a physical blow. Pine and smoke and iron. Power, dominance, ancient and overwhelming. A king. "Breathe," the man commanded, his voice a low growl that cut through the wind. Alara tried. Her lungs hitched, stuttered. Frost clung to her lashes. The alpha, the king, swore under his breath. He shifted, lifting her effortlessly from the snow. She felt herself pressed against something solid and warm. A chest, armor beneath heavy fur. "Stay with me," he ordered, as if death were something that could be reasoned with. "Do you hear me? Stay!" Alara wanted to tell him it was too late, that she was already gone, that no one had ever cared whether she stayed or left before, but the words wouldn't come. Darkness folded over her like a blanket, and the last thing she felt was the steady, relentless beat of his heart against hers. She woke to firelight. The warmth was so startling, so alien, that for a moment Alara thought she had died and somehow ended up somewhere impossible, somewhere safe. Then the pain hit. Her fingers burned, her toes screamed, every inch of her skin felt raw, as if she'd been flayed alive. "Don't move." The voice was firm, female and unfamiliar. Alara's eyes focused slowly, adjusting to the light. She was in a bed, an actual bed, with thick furs and soft pillows. A fire roared in a stone hearth. The walls were rough-hewn timber and dark stone. A woman stood beside her, middle-aged and stern-faced, holding a clay cup. "Drink this." Alara tried to sit up. Her body refused. The woman sighed, set the cup down, and propped Alara up with surprising gentleness. "You're lucky to be alive, girl. Another hour and you'd have been frozen solid." "Where?" Alara's voice was a broken rasp. "Iron Peak Fortress. Northern stronghold of King Draven Kale." The woman pressed the cup to Alara's lips. "Drink. It'll help with the pain." The liquid was bitter, herbal. Alara drank because she didn't have the strength to argue. "The king found you," the woman continued, pulling the furs back to inspect Alara's hands. "Half dead in the snow. He carried you back himself, don't know why. He's not exactly the charitable type." Alara's mind struggled to process the words. "The king, the alpha from the storm." "Why?" she whispered. "Like I said, don't know." The woman dabbed ointment on Alara's raw fingertips. "But you're here now, and until he decides what to do with you, you're under his protection." Protection. The word felt foreign, dangerous. "I should leave," Alara said weakly. The woman snorted. "Leave? Girl, it's the dead of winter. You'd be dead before you reached the gates. Besides—" She leaned closer, her expression grim. "You don't leave Iron Peak unless the king allows it. This isn't a charity house. It's a fortress. And you're his guest, whether you like it or not." Alara closed her eyes. She had survived the storm, survived the betrayal, survived the cold. But she had no idea if she would survive this. 3 days passed before she was strong enough to walk. The woman, whose name was Marin and who served as the fortress healer, brought her food, changed her bandages, and said little else. Alara didn't mind. Silence was easier than questions, but the silence didn't last. On the 4th day, the door to her room opened and a different figure entered. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the controlled grace of a predator, King Draven Kale. He filled the doorway like a storm cloud, his presence so overwhelming that Alara's breath caught in her throat. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 30, but his face was hard, weathered by war and loss. Scars traced pale lines across his jaw and temple. His eyes, cold and piercing, locked onto hers. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then the king stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "You're awake," he said. His voice was deep, rough-edged, the kind of voice that expected obedience. Alara sat up slowly, pulling the furs around herself. "Yes." "Good." He crossed the room in 3 strides, stopping at the foot of her bed. "Then you can tell me why a caravan of traitors left you to die in my mountains." Alara's stomach clenched. "They didn't leave me. They abandoned you." His tone was flat, final. "I found the tracks. Spoke to the traitors myself before I sent them on their way. They claimed you wandered off. But you're too smart for that." She stared at him, caught off guard. No one had ever called her smart before. "So tell me," Draven continued, his gaze never wavering. "What did you do to make them hate you enough to let you freeze?" Alara's throat tightened. "I existed." The king's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or understanding. "You're an Omega," he said. "Yes." "Unclaimed." "Yes." "And they were taking you north, to me." Alara's heart stopped. Draven's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You were part of the dowry shipment, a bride offering from the Southern Territories." His eyes swept over her, clinical and cold. "They said you were worthless, that I wouldn't want you." "They were right," Alara said quietly. The king tilted his head, studying her. "Were they?" She didn't answer. Draven exhaled slowly, then turned toward the door. "You'll stay here, recover. When you're strong enough, we'll discuss what happens next." "Why?" The question escaped before Alara could stop it. The king paused, glancing back at her. Why what? Why did you save me? For a moment, something unreadable crossed his face. Then it was gone, replaced by stone. Because I don't leave people to die in my territory, he said simply. And then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Alara sat in the silence, her heart pounding, her mind racing. She didn't understand. She didn't understand any of this. But one thing was clear. She was no longer abandoned. She was trapped. The fortress was a maze of stone and shadows. As Alara grew stronger, Marin allowed her to explore, under supervision. A guard followed her everywhere, silent and watchful. She didn't mind. She was used to being watched. Iron Peak was unlike anything she'd ever seen. Built into the side of a mountain, it was more fortress than castle. Functional, brutal, designed for war. The halls were wide and cold, lit by torches that threw flickering shadows on the walls. Everywhere she looked, she saw soldiers, alphas mostly, with hard eyes and harder expressions. They stared at her. Not with desire, not with curiosity, with suspicion. They don't trust outsiders, Marin explained one morning as they walked through the lower courtyard. Especially southern ones. There's been tension between the territories for years. Why? Alara asked. Marin shot her a sharp look. You really don't know. Alara shook her head. The healer sighed. The southern lords have been trying to weaken the north for decades. Trade restrictions, political scheming. They want control of the mountain passes, and King Draven refuses to give it to them. So they sent Omegas as peace offerings, Alara said slowly. More like bribes. Marin's expression darkened. Pretty distractions to keep the king occupied. But Draven's not interested. He's rejected every bride they've sent for the past 5 years. Alara's chest tightened. Then why did they send me? Marin didn't answer. That night, Alara couldn't sleep. She lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, her mind churning. She was a political pawn. A rejected bride. A burden the king hadn't asked for. She should leave. But where would she go? She had no family, no home, no one who wanted her. A soft sound pulled her from her thoughts. Footsteps. In the hall. Alara sat up slowly, her heart pounding. The footsteps stopped outside her door. Then, a knock. Come in, she said quietly. The door opened. Draven stood in the doorway, still fully dressed, his expression unreadable. You're awake, he said. I couldn't sleep. He nodded, as if that made sense. Then he stepped inside, closing the door behind him. Alara's pulse quickened. Is something wrong? No. Draven moved to the window, staring out at the snow-covered mountains. I just wanted to check on you. The admission was so unexpected that Alara didn't know how to respond. I'm fine, she said finally. Draven glanced at her, and for the first time she saw something other than cold calculation in his eyes. Exhaustion. You don't have to lie, he said quietly. I know what it's like to survive something you shouldn't have. Alara's breath caught. The king turned back to the window. I lost my mate 3 years ago, he said, his voice low. She died in childbirth. The child didn't survive either. Alara's heart twisted. The council's been pushing me to remarry ever since, Draven continued, to secure an heir, to strengthen alliances. But I've refused. I won't use someone like that. I won't. He stopped, his jaw tightening. You won't treat them like a transaction, Alara finished softly. Draven looked at her and something shifted in his gaze. No, he said. I won't. They stood in silence for a long moment. Then Draven spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. When I found you in the snow, you were so still. I thought you were already gone. But then you opened your eyes, and... He paused, as if searching for the right words. You looked at me like you'd already accepted death, like it didn't matter. Alara swallowed hard. It didn't. Why? Because no one cared if I lived or died. The words hung in the air between them, raw and brutal. Draven's expression didn't change, but his voice softened. I care, he said. Alara's breath stopped. The king held her gaze, unflinching. You're under my protection now. That means something, whether you believe it or not. He turned and walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. "Get some sleep," he said. "Tomorrow, we start teaching you how to survive here." And then he was gone. Elara sat in the darkness, her heart pounding, her mind reeling. For the first time in her life, someone had chosen her, not because they had to, but because they wanted to, and she had no idea what to do with that. The training yard was frozen earth and blood-stained snow. Elara stood at the edge, wrapped in borrowed furs that were still too thin for the northern cold, watching as soldiers clashed in brutal combat drills. Steel rang against steel. Alphas roared and grunted, their breath clouding the air. The sound was primal, violent, and utterly foreign to everything she'd ever known. "You'll start with the basics," Marin said beside her, arms crossed. "Self-defense, survival skills, how to navigate the fortress without getting lost or killed." "Killed?" Elara echoed. The healer gave her a grim look. "This isn't a palace, girl. It's a war stronghold. Half these men have been fighting since they could walk. They don't take kindly to weakness, and right now, that's exactly what you look like to them." Alara's jaw tightened. She'd spent her whole life being told she was weak, worthless, breakable. She was tired of hearing it. "Then teach me not to be," she said quietly. Marin's eyebrows rose. For a moment, something like approval flickered across her weathered face. "All right, but don't say I didn't warn you." The healer led her across the yard toward a cluster of wooden training dummies. Several soldiers paused mid-swing to stare. Their expressions ranged from curious to openly hostile. "That's the one the king brought back?" one of them muttered, loud enough to be heard. "The Southern Omega," another replied with a sneer. "Heard she was left to die." "Probably for good reason." Laughter rippled through the group. Elara kept her eyes forward, her face blank. She'd learned long ago that reacting only made it worse. Marin didn't share her restraint. "You've got something to say, Gareth?" the healer snapped, rounding on the biggest of the soldiers. A mountain of an alpha with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow. Gareth shrugged, his smile cold. "Just wondering why we're wasting resources on dead weight. King's got a soft heart, I guess." "The king's heart is none of your business," Marin shot back. "And if you've got a problem with his decisions, you can take it up with him, personally." The soldier's smile faded. No one argued with Draven Kale, not if they valued their position or their life. Gareth turned away with a dismissive grunt, but not before shooting Elara one last contemptuous look. Marin exhaled sharply. "Ignore them. They're testing you." "They hate me," Elara said simply. "They don't know you." The healer picked up a wooden training blade from a nearby rack, pressing it into Alara's hands. "But they will. Now, grip it like this. No, tighter. If someone comes at you, you need to hold on like your life depends on it, because it does." The lesson was brutal. Alara's hands were still healing from frostbite, and every swing sent fire shooting through her palms. Her arms trembled, her legs shook, but she didn't stop. She couldn't afford to. Marin was relentless, correcting her stance, her grip, her footwork with sharp commands and sharper criticisms. "You're too stiff. Loosen your shoulders. No, not like that. You want to get gutted?" By the time the sun reached its highest point, Elara was drenched in sweat despite the cold. Her muscles screamed, her hands bled through the bandages, but she didn't quit. "Enough," Marin finally said, taking the practice blade from her. "You've got determination. I'll give you that. But determination won't save you if you can't back it up with skill. We'll continue tomorrow." Elara nodded, too exhausted to speak. As she turned to leave, she caught sight of a figure watching from the upper rampart. Draven. The king stood in the shadows, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Their eyes met for a brief electric moment. Then he turned and disappeared into the fortress. That night, Elara was summoned to the Great Hall. It was the first time she'd been allowed inside the heart of the stronghold. The space was massive. High stone ceilings, a roaring fireplace that could have swallowed a man whole, long wooden tables scarred by years of use. Mounted weapons lined the walls like trophies. The air smelled of smoke, roasted meat, and tension. At the head of the table sat Draven, flanked by his council. There were 5 of them, all alphas, all watching her with varying degrees of suspicion as she approached. "Sit," Draven commanded, gesturing to an empty chair near the fire. Elara obeyed, her heart hammering. Every instinct screamed at her to stay small, stay quiet, stay invisible. But invisibility wouldn't work here. These men had already seen her. "This is Alara Voss," Draven said, his voice cutting through the low murmur of conversation. "The Omega I found in the mountains. She'll be staying at Iron Peak under my protection." One of the councilmen, a grizzled warrior with gray-streaked hair and cold blue eyes, leaned forward. "For how long?" "As long as necessary," Draven replied evenly. "That's not an answer." The man's tone was sharp, challenging. "We're not a charity house, my lord, and with all respect, we can't afford distractions, not with the Southern Lords circling like vultures. She's not a distraction, Aldrich. Isn't she?" Aldrich's gaze shifted to Alara, cold and assessing. "She was part of a bride shipment, a political offering, and now she's here, eating our food, taking up space in our fortress. What message does that send to the Southern Territories?" "That I don't answer to them," Draven said flatly. Another councilman, younger, with sharp features and a calculating expression, spoke up. "The girl's presence complicates things. The traitors who abandoned her are already spreading rumors, saying you took her as a concubine, that you've gone soft." "Let them talk," Draven said. "I don't care what traitors think." "You should," Aldrich's voice hardened, "because those traitors report back to the Southern Lords, and the Southern Lords are looking for any excuse to claim you're unstable, unfit to rule. If they think they can destabilize the North by exploiting a weakness, she's not a weakness." The room fell silent. Draven's tone had shifted, still calm, but laced with something dangerous, something that made even Aldrich pause. "Alara Voss is under my protection," the king continued, his gaze sweeping across the council. "That's final. If anyone has a problem with that, they can bring it to me directly. Otherwise, this discussion is over." The councilmen exchanged glances, but no one argued further. Aldrich sat back, his expression tight. "As you wish, my lord." Draven's eyes flicked to Alara. "You're dismissed." She rose quickly, bowing her head in a gesture of respect she didn't feel, and left the hall before anyone could say another word. But as she stepped into the cold corridor, she heard Aldrich's voice carry through the open door. "She'll be the death of him," the councilman muttered. "Mark my words." Sleep didn't come easily that night. Alara lay in the darkness, replaying the council meeting over and over. The hostility, the suspicion, the way they'd looked at her, not as a person, but as a problem to be solved. She understood their logic. She was a stranger, an outsider, a potential threat. But understanding didn't make it hurt less. A soft knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. "It's me," Marin's voice called. "Open up." Alara climbed out of bed, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders, and opened the door. The healer stood in the hallway, holding a small wooden box. Her expression was unusually somber. "What's wrong?" Alara asked. "Nothing's wrong, but we need to talk." Marin stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "Sit." Alara obeyed, perching on the edge of the bed. Marin set the box on the table and opened it, revealing a collection of dried herbs, small vials, and what looked like a folded piece of parchment. "The council doesn't trust you," Marin said bluntly, "and they're not wrong to be cautious. You're a stranger in a place that doesn't tolerate strangers. But there's more to it than that." "What do you mean?" The healer pulled out the parchment, unfolding it carefully. It was old, brittle, covered in faded ink. "This fortress has a history, a bloody one, and part of that history involves betrayal." Alara's pulse quickened. "What kind of betrayal?" 50 years ago, the Southern Territories tried to take control of the North through marriage. They sent a bride, an Omega, to the king at the time, Draven's grandfather. She was beautiful, charming, everything a queen should be. The king fell for her. Hard. Marin's expression darkened. But she was a spy. She fed information to the Southern Lords for years. By the time the truth came out, half the northern strongholds had been compromised. The king executed her himself. But the damage was done. Trust was shattered, and ever since the Northern Territories have been wary of Southern Omegas. Alara's stomach twisted. "They think I'm a spy." "Some do. Others just think you're bad luck." Marin folded the parchment, tucking it back into the box. "But here's the thing, girl. Whether they're right or wrong doesn't matter. Perception is reality in a place like this, and right now you're perceived as a threat. Then what am I supposed to do?" Alara's voice cracked despite herself. "I didn't ask to be here. I didn't ask for any of this." I know. Marin's tone softened. But you're here now, and if you want to survive, you need to stop being a victim and start being something they can't ignore. Like what? Like someone useful. Alara stared at her. I don't understand. Marin leaned forward, her eyes sharp. You're smart. I've seen it. You notice things. You adapt. You endure. Those are valuable skills. Use them. Learn the fortress. Learn the people. Make yourself indispensable. Because the moment you become more valuable alive than dead is the moment they stop seeing you as a threat. The words settled over Alara like a challenge. And what if I can't? She whispered. Marin's smile was grim. Then you won't survive. Shout. The next morning, Alara woke before dawn. Her body ached from the previous day's training, but she ignored it. Marin's words had lit something inside her, a spark of defiance she hadn't felt in years. She wouldn't be a victim anymore. She dressed quickly, pulling on the warmest clothes she had, and slipped out into the cold corridors. The fortress was still mostly asleep, silent except for the occasional footstep of a patrolling guard. Alara made her way to the archives. She'd noticed them during one of her walks, a small, dimly lit room tucked away in the lower levels. No one seemed to use it. No one seemed to care about it, which made it perfect. The door was unlocked. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old parchment. Shelves lined the walls, crammed with books, scrolls, maps, and records. It was chaotic, disorganized, forgotten. Alara ran her fingers along the spines of the books, her heart pounding with something that felt almost like hope. If she wanted to survive, she needed to understand this place, its history, its people, its weaknesses. And knowledge was power. She pulled a thick leather-bound volume from the shelf and opened it to the first page, The Founding of Iron Peak Fortress. Hours passed. Alara read until her eyes burned, absorbing everything she could. The history of the Northern Territories, the wars with the Southern Lords, the bloodlines of the ruling families, the treaties, betrayals, alliances. And then she found something. A genealogy chart, old, faded, barely legible. But there, near the bottom, was a name that made her breath catch. Luna Kalin Voss. Voss, her family name. Alara's hands trembled as she traced the line upward. Luna Kalin had been a northern queen, centuries ago. The chart showed her lineage branching out, connecting to various noble houses. But the line ended abruptly. No descendants listed. No explanation. Just gone. What are you doing? Alara jumped, slamming the book shut. Draven stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Alara's mind raced. I was just reading. The king stepped inside, his gaze sweeping over the cluttered shelves. In the archives, at dawn. She swallowed hard. I couldn't sleep. Draven studied her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, his mouth quirked into something that almost resembled a smile. Neither could I, he admitted. He moved to the shelves, running his hand along the spines of the books. My father used to come here, when the council frustrated him, when the weight of leadership felt too heavy. He'd hide in this room and read until he felt human again. Alara's chest tightened. I didn't mean to intrude. You're not intruding. Draven pulled a book from the shelf, a thin volume bound in dark leather. This place is forgotten. No one comes here anymore, except me. He glanced at the book she'd been reading, still clutched in her hands. What were you researching? Alara hesitated. Then, slowly, she opened the book to the genealogy chart. My name, Voss. I found it here, connected to a queen. Draven's expression shifted. He leaned closer, studying the chart. Luna Kalin Voss, he murmured, the White Wolf Queen. Alara's heart stuttered. You know her? Every northern child knows her. She was a legend. Draven's voice was quiet, almost reverent. They said she had hair like winter snow, that she could see things others couldn't, visions, prophecies. She ruled alongside her mate for 30 years, and under her guidance, the North prospered like never before. What happened to her? Alara whispered. Draven's jaw tightened. She disappeared, one night, without warning. Some say she was assassinated by Southern spies. Others believe she walked into the mountains and never returned. Her bloodline was thought to be extinct. He looked at Alara, and for the first time she saw something other than calculation in his eyes. Recognition. "Your hair," he said slowly. "It's white. Like hers." Alara's breath caught. "Do you think—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Draven closed the book, his expression guarded. "I think coincidences are dangerous in places like this, and I think you should be very careful who you tell about this." "Why?" "Because if the council finds out you might be connected to Luna Kalen's bloodline, they'll either see you as a threat or a tool." His voice hardened. "And neither option ends well for you." Alara's pulse raced. "What should I do?" Draven held her gaze, and something unspoken passed between them. "Stay close to me," he said quietly. "Trust no one else." Before Alara could respond, a horn blared outside, loud, urgent, cutting through the morning air. Draven's entire body tensed. "That's the warning signal." "Warning for what?" "Intruders." He was already moving toward the door. "Stay here. Don't leave this room." "Wait." But he was gone, the door slamming shut behind him. Alara stood alone in the archives, her heart pounding, the genealogy chart still open in her hands. And for the first time since arriving at Iron Peak, she realized something. She wasn't just a survivor, she was a secret. And secrets, in a place like this, were the most dangerous things of all. The fortress erupted into chaos. Alara could hear it even from the depths of the archives. Shouting, running footsteps, the clash of steel being drawn. She pressed her ear to the door, straining to make sense of the noise. "South Gate!" someone roared. "They're at the South Gate!" Her stomach dropped. She should stay. Draven had told her to stay. But the sound of battle pulled at something deep inside her. A need to know, to see, to understand what was happening. Alara eased the door open and slipped into the corridor. The fortress was a hive of activity. Soldiers rushed past, armor clanking, weapons drawn. No one paid her any attention. She was invisible again, just another shadow in the chaos. She followed the flow of movement toward the south gate, keeping to the walls, her heart hammering. When she reached the courtyard, she froze. A group of riders had breached the outer defenses. Not many, maybe a dozen. But they were heavily armed, their faces obscured by hoods and scarves. They moved with precision, like trained soldiers. And at the center of the courtyard, facing them down, was Draven. The king stood alone, his sword drawn, his expression cold as winter itself. "You've made a mistake," he said, his voice carrying across the yard. "Iron Peak doesn't fall to raiders." One of the riders dismounted, pulling back his hood to reveal a sharp, angular face. An alpha, young, arrogant, and radiating hostility. "We're not here to take the fortress, Kael," the rider said. "We're here for the girl." Alara's blood turned to ice. Draven's grip on his sword tightened. "What girl?" "The Omega, white hair, southern-born." The rider smiled, cold and cruel. "We know you have her. Hand her over, and we leave quietly." "And if I refuse?" "Then we take her by force." The courtyard fell silent. Draven's expression didn't change, but Alara saw the shift in his stance, the predatory stillness of a wolf about to strike. "You can try," the king said softly. The rider's smile widened. "We were hoping you'd say that." He raised his hand, and the other riders drew their weapons. Draven moved first. He was fast, impossibly fast. His sword flashed in the weak morning light, cutting through the first attacker before the man could even raise his blade. Blood sprayed across the snow. The courtyard exploded into violence. Draven's soldiers poured in from all sides, engaging the raiders in brutal close combat. Steel rang against steel. Men screamed. The air filled with the smell of blood and smoke. Alara watched from the shadows, frozen, unable to look away. And then she saw it. One of the riders broke away from the main fight, circling toward the side entrance, toward the archives, toward her. He hadn't seen her yet, but he would. Alara's mind raced. She could run, hide. Hope he didn't find her, or, she thought of Marin's words, make yourself indispensable. She thought of Draven's trust. Stay close to me. And she made a choice. Alara stepped out of the shadows. "Looking for me?" she called. The rider's head snapped toward her. His eyes widened in recognition. Then he lunged. Alara didn't run. She dropped low the way Marin had taught her and grabbed a loose stone from the ground. As the rider closed the distance, she swung with everything she had. The stone connected with his temple with a sickening crack. The rider staggered, blood pouring down his face. He swung wildly, his blade whistling past Alara's ear. She rolled to the side, her heart pounding, her hands shaking. The rider roared and lunged again. And then Draven was there. The king moved like a force of nature, his sword cutting through the rider's guard in a single brutal strike. The man crumpled to the ground, lifeless. Draven turned to Alara, his eyes blazing. "I told you to stay in the archives," he growled. "He was coming for me," Alara shot back, breathless. "I couldn't just hide." For a moment, Draven looked like he wanted to argue. Then his expression shifted, something between frustration and reluctant admiration. "You're reckless," he muttered. "I'm alive," she countered. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "That you are." The sounds of battle were fading now. The raiders were either dead or fleeing. Draven's soldiers moved through the courtyard, securing the area, tending to the wounded. Aldrich appeared, his face grim. "We've got 3 dead, my lord. 5 wounded. The raiders are neutralized." "And their leader?" Draven demanded. "Escaped." Aldrich's expression darkened. "But we interrogated one of the survivors. They were hired, sent specifically to retrieve the Omega." Draven's jaw clenched. "By who?" "They didn't know. Orders came through a broker, but the price on her head was high, very high." Alara's stomach twisted. Draven turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Someone wants you, badly." "Why?" she whispered. "That," the king said grimly, "is what we're going to find out." He glanced at Aldrich. "Double the guard. No one enters or leaves the fortress without my permission, and find out who's hiring mercenaries to breach my walls." Aldrich nodded and strode away. Draven looked back at Alara, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Then he reached out, brushing a strand of white hair from her face. "You should be terrified," he said quietly. "I am," Alara admitted, "but you fought anyway." She met his gaze. "I didn't have a choice." "There's always a choice." His voice softened. "You could have hidden. Could have let me handle it. But you didn't. Why?" Alara thought about the question. About the stone in her hand, the fear in her chest, the moment she'd stepped out of the shadows. "Because I'm tired of being helpless," she said finally, "and because you told me to trust you. So I did." Something flickered in Draven's eyes, something raw and unguarded. "Then trust me now," he said. "Whatever this is, whatever's happening, we'll face it together." Alara nodded, her throat tight, but as they stood in the blood-stained courtyard, surrounded by the aftermath of violence, one thought echoed through her mind. Someone wanted her dead. Or worse, someone wanted her alive. And until she knew which, nowhere in this fortress was truly safe. The attack changed everything. Within hours, Iron Peak transformed from a fortress into a prison. Guards patrolled every corridor, every entrance, every shadow. No one entered, no one left. And at the center of it all, like the eye of a storm, was Alara. The girl someone wanted badly enough to send armed mercenaries into the heart of the North's most fortified stronghold. She sat in Draven's private study, wrapped in furs, watching the king pace like a caged wolf. The room was stark. Stone walls, a heavy wooden desk scarred with knife marks, maps pinned everywhere. A fire crackled in the hearth, but it did nothing to chase away the cold that had settled into her bones. "They knew you were here," Draven said, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "They knew exactly where to look. Which means someone inside this fortress is feeding them information." Alara's stomach clenched. "You think there's a spy?" "I know there is." He stopped pacing, his jaw set. "The question is who, and more importantly, who hired them?" Aldrich stood near the door, his arms crossed, his expression grim. "We've interrogated the surviving raider. He claims he was hired through a broker in the southern trade cities. No direct contact with whoever wants the girl. But the payment was substantial, gold and gemstones, more than most mercenaries see in a lifetime." "Someone with deep pockets," Draven muttered. "Someone powerful." Or desperate, Alara said quietly. Both men turned to look at her. She met Draven's gaze. Why would anyone pay that much for me? I'm nobody. I have nothing. Unless... She hesitated, her mind racing back to the archives, to the genealogy chart, to the name that had made her heart stop. Unless they know something I don't. Draven's expression darkened. The bloodline. What bloodline? Aldrich demanded, his eyes narrowing. Draven exchanged a glance with Alara, and she saw the calculation in his face. He was deciding how much to reveal, how much to risk. Finally, he spoke. Alara found records in the archives. A connection to Luna Kaelin Voss, the White Wolf Queen. The room fell silent. Aldrich stared at Alara as if seeing her for the first time. That's impossible. The Voss bloodline died out centuries ago. Apparently not, Draven said flatly. You can't be serious. Aldrich's voice rose. You're basing this on what? A name in an old book? The girl's hair color? And the fact that someone is willing to kill to get her, Draven shot back. That's not a coincidence, Aldrich. Someone knows who she is, or what she represents. Then we need answers. Aldrich turned to Alara, his expression hard. What do you know about your family, your parents, where you came from? Alara's throat tightened. Nothing. My parents never talked about our history. My mother was a servant in a southern lord's household. My father... She paused, swallowing hard. I never knew him. My mother said he died before I was born. Convenient, Aldrich muttered. Aldrich, Draven's voice was a warning. The councilman held up his hands. I'm not accusing her of lying. But you have to admit, my lord, this is all very convenient. A mysterious Omega with a lost bloodline shows up at our gates just as political tensions with the South are reaching a breaking point. It's too perfect. Or too orchestrated, Draven said quietly. Alara's pulse quickened. What do you mean? Draven moved to the desk, spreading out a map of the northern and southern territories. Think about it. If someone wanted to destabilize the North, what better way than to plant a seed of chaos? A girl with a claim to an ancient bloodline, a potential heir, a symbol of legitimacy. You think I'm a pawn, Alara said, her voice hollow. I think someone wants to use you as one. Draven's eyes met hers, and she saw the conflict there, the struggle between duty and something else, something softer. But that doesn't mean we have to let them. Aldrich shook his head. This is insane. We don't even know if the bloodline claim is real. For all we know, it's a fabrication designed to manipulate us into... Then we verify it, Draven interrupted. There are ways to prove a bloodline. Old rituals, tests. Rituals? Alara echoed, dread pooling in her stomach. Draven hesitated. The Voss line was said to carry a mark, a birthmark or a scar that appeared only in times of great danger or awakening. It was called the Luna's seal, a symbol of the moon and wolf combined. If you truly carry that bloodline, the mark will reveal itself. And if it doesn't, Alara whispered, then we'll know this is all a lie, and we can move forward accordingly. Aldrich nodded slowly. When? Tonight. Draven's voice was final. We can't wait. Every moment we delay gives our enemies more time to move against us. The councilman left without another word, the door closing heavily behind him. Alara sat frozen, her mind reeling. A mark. A ritual. A test to prove something she didn't even understand. Alara. Draven's voice was gentler now. He crossed to her, kneeling so they were eye level. I know this is terrifying, but if there's even a chance you're connected to Luna Kaelin, we need to know, because that changes everything. How? She asked, her voice breaking. How does it change anything? I'm still just... You're not just anything. His hand found hers, warm and steady. If you carry that bloodline, you have a claim to the northern throne that predates every current ruling house, including mine. You would be royalty, Alara, true royalty. Her breath caught. I don't want that. I know. His thumb brushed over her knuckles. But wanting and being are two different things, and right now, we need to know the truth. She met his gaze, searching for any hint of deception, any sign that he was using her the way everyone else had. But all she saw was honesty and fear. All right, she whispered. I'll do it. The ritual took place in the oldest part of the fortress, a chamber carved directly into the mountain itself. The walls were rough stone, ancient and cold, covered in faded carvings that depicted wolves and moons and crowned figures. A single stone altar stood at the center, worn smooth by centuries of use. Torches lined the walls, casting flickering shadows that made the carvings seem to move. Alara stood at the threshold, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Draven stood beside her, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back. You don't have to do this alone. I thought the ritual required isolation, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It requires intention, not solitude. He looked down at her, and something in his expression made her chest ache. I'm not leaving you. Behind them, the council had gathered, all 5 members, including Aldrich. Their faces were masks of skepticism and wariness. Watching, judging, waiting for her to fail. Marin was there too, standing slightly apart from the others. The healer's expression was unreadable, but when her eyes met Alara's, she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Begin, Aldrich said coldly. Draven guided Alara to the altar. A shallow bowl rested on its surface, filled with water so clear it looked like liquid glass. Beside it lay a ceremonial dagger, old, ornate, the blade etched with symbols she didn't recognize. The ritual is simple, Draven explained, his voice low. You place your hand in the water and speak your true name. If the bloodline is real, the Luna's seal will manifest. And if it doesn't? Then nothing happens. Simple. Terrifying. Alara reached for the bowl with trembling hands. The water was ice cold, shocking against her skin. She took a breath, steadying herself. My name is Alara Voss, she said, her voice stronger than she felt. Nothing happened. The council members shifted, murmurs rippling through the group. Louder, Aldrich commanded, with conviction. Alara's jaw tightened. She met his gaze across the chamber, refusing to flinch. My name is Alara Voss, she repeated, her voice ringing off the stone walls. Daughter of no one, survivor of the storm, I stand here not by choice, but by fate. The water began to glow. Alara gasped, jerking her hand back, but Draven caught her wrist, holding her steady. Don't pull away, he said urgently. Let it happen. The glow intensified, spreading from the bowl up her arm like liquid light. It didn't burn, it didn't hurt. It felt right, like something waking up inside her that had been asleep for too long. And then, pain. Sharp, searing, concentrated on the inside of her left forearm. Alara cried out, trying to pull free, but Draven's grip held firm. Almost there, he murmured. Hold on. The pain peaked and then vanished. Alara sagged against the altar, gasping for breath. Her arm throbbed, but the agony was gone. She looked down. On the pale skin of her inner forearm, a mark had appeared. Black as ink, intricate as lace. A crescent moon cradled between the jaws of a wolf, surrounded by patterns that looked like frost and flame combined. The Luna's seal. The chamber erupted. It's real, someone breathed. Impossible. She's a Voss. A true Voss. Aldrich stepped forward, his face pale. Let me see. Alara extended her arm, too stunned to do anything else. The councilman examined the mark closely, his expression shifting from disbelief to something darker. This changes everything, he said quietly. Draven's hand tightened on Alara's shoulder. Yes, it does. Another councilman, the sharp-featured one who'd spoken at the first meeting, pushed forward. If she carries Luna Kaelin's bloodline, she has a legitimate claim to the Northern Throne, a claim that supersedes the Kael line. She has a claim, Draven agreed calmly, but that doesn't mean she'll press it. All eyes turned to Alara. She stood frozen, the weight of their stares crushing. Her entire life she'd been invisible, worthless. And now they were looking at her like she was a threat or a prize. I don't want the throne, she said, her voice hoarse. What you want is irrelevant, Aldrich said bluntly. The Southern Lords will learn of this, and when they do, they'll either try to kill you or marry you off to secure an alliance. Either way, you're a weapon now. The only question is who wields you. No one wields me, Alara said, her voice hardening. Aldrich's smile was cold. Then you're more naive than I thought. Enough. Draven's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Alara is under my protection. That hasn't changed. What has changed is that we now know why she was targeted, and we can prepare accordingly. Prepare how? Another councilman demanded. By hiding her? By pretending this didn't happen? My lord, with respect, we cannot ignore this. The political ramifications alone. I'm not ignoring anything, Draven snapped. But I'm also not handing her over to vultures who'll tear her apart the moment they get the chance. She stays here. She stays safe. And anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me. The challenge hung in the air. No one took it. Aldrich inclined his head stiffly. As you wish, my lord, but mark my words, this will not end quietly. He turned and strode from the chamber, the other councilman following in his wake. Only Marin remained. The healer approached slowly, her eyes fixed on the mark. May I? Alara nodded. Marin traced the edge of the seal with one weathered finger, her expression thoughtful. I've only seen this in old texts. Never thought I'd see it on living skin. What does it mean? Alara whispered. It means you're exactly who the legends say you are. Marin's gaze lifted to meet hers. Luna Kalen's line was said to carry power. Not just political power, real power. The kind that could change the course of nations. The kind that people would kill for. I don't feel powerful, Alara said weakly. You will. Marin squeezed her arm gently. When the time comes, you will. The healer left, her footsteps echoing in the empty chamber. Alara stood alone with Draven, the torches guttering low, the ancient carvings watching from the walls. What happens now? She asked. Draven exhaled slowly. Now we figure out who's been pulling the strings, because someone knew about your bloodline before we did, and they've been planning this for a long time. How do you know? Because they went to a lot of trouble to get you here. He turned to face her fully, his expression grave. The caravan, the abandonment, the attack. None of it was random, Alara. It was designed to put you exactly where you are now, in the north, in my fortress, under my protection. The question is why. Alara's mind raced, pieces clicking together. You think someone wanted me to reveal the mark? I think someone wanted to force our hand, to make us choose between protecting you or exposing you. Either way, they win. If we hide you, we look weak. If we reveal you, we destabilize the entire political structure of the North. So what do we do? Draven's eyes burned with something fierce. We take control of the narrative. We don't hide. We don't apologize. We show them that you're not a threat to the North. You're its future. I don't understand. He stepped closer, his voice dropping. Tomorrow, I'm calling a full assembly. Every lord, every house, every allied territory. And I'm going to introduce you not as a refugee, but as Luna Kalen's heir, a queen in your own right. Alara's blood turned to ice. Draven, no, that's the only way to keep you safe. His hands found her shoulders, grounding her. If we try to hide what you are, they'll hunt you forever. But if we claim it, if we own it, they'll have to acknowledge you, respect you, and more importantly, they'll think twice before attacking you. Or they'll attack harder, she whispered. Maybe. His expression softened. But this time, you won't be facing them alone. The weight of his words settled over her. For so long, she'd been alone, fighting alone, surviving alone. The idea that someone would stand beside her, that someone would choose to, felt impossible. Why are you doing this? She asked, her voice breaking. You could throw me to them. Wash your hands of the whole mess. Why risk everything for me? Draven's thumb brushed her cheek and she realized she was crying. Because the moment I found you in that snow, he said quietly, something changed. I don't know what. I don't know why. But I knew that letting you die would haunt me for the rest of my life. And now that I know who you really are, he paused, his jaw tightening. I won't let them destroy you. Not the council, not the Southern Lords, not anyone. Alara couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. So she did the only thing that made sense. She kissed him. It was desperate, terrified, grateful, all the emotions she couldn't put into words crashing together in a single moment. Draven froze for half a heartbeat, then pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her like a shield. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "That was," Draven started. "A mistake," Alara whispered. "No." His voice was rough. "That was the first thing that's made sense in days." Before she could respond, the door to the chamber burst open. A guard stumbled in, his face ashen. "My lord, we have a situation." Draven released Alara instantly, his entire demeanor shifting to battle-ready. "What kind of situation?" "The Southern Territories." The guard was panting, clearly having run the entire way. "They've sent an envoy, a large one, armed. They're demanding entry to the fortress." "Demanding?" Draven's voice was deadly soft. "They claim they have evidence of treason. They're accusing someone in the fortress of conspiring with enemies of the crown." The guard swallowed hard. "They're asking for Alara Voss to be handed over for questioning." The world tilted. Alara felt the blood drain from her face. "They know." "How?" Draven demanded. "The ritual just happened. There's no way." "The spy," Alara breathed. "The one feeding them information. They must have been watching." Draven swore viciously. He turned to the guard. "How many?" 50 men, maybe more. They're camped at the gates. Their leader is demanding an audience with you within the hour. If you refuse..." The guard hesitated. "If I refuse," Draven prompted, his voice dangerously calm, "they'll consider it an act of war." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Draven's mind was clearly racing, calculating, strategizing. Then his expression hardened with resolve. "Send word to assemble the full garrison, battle formations, and find Aldrich. I need the council in the war room immediately." The guard saluted and disappeared. Draven turned to Alara, and she saw the truth in his eyes before he spoke. "You need to hide." "No." The word came out stronger than she expected. "If I hide, they win. You said it yourself. We need to take control of the narrative." "That was before they showed up with an army at my gates," Draven shot back. "This is different. This is exactly what you said would happen. They're forcing your hand, making you choose." Alara stepped closer, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "So don't choose their game, choose mine." "What are you talking about?" "Let me face them." "Absolutely not." "Draven, listen to me." She grabbed his arm, forcing him to meet her gaze. "If you refuse to hand me over, they'll attack. People will die. Your people. But if I go to them willingly, they'll kill you. Maybe. Or maybe I can buy us time. Give you a chance to figure out who the spy is and how they're communicating with the South." Her grip tightened. "I'm not asking for permission. I'm telling you this is the right move. It's suicide. It's survival." Her voice broke slightly. "Trust me. The way you asked me to trust you." Draven stared at her, conflict warring across his face. Then slowly, he shook his head. "If you do this," he said quietly, "you do it my way. You don't go alone. And you don't go without a plan." Relief flooded through her. "All right. And Alara?" His hand cupped her face, his eyes burning into hers. "If they so much as touch you, I'm burning their entire delegation to the ground. Consequences be damned." She managed a shaky smile. "Deal, so." The war room was chaos. The council shouted over each other, voices raised in anger and fear. Maps were spread across the table, markers showing troop positions and defensive lines. The tension was so thick Alara could taste it. "We can't hand her over," one councilman argued. "It sets a precedent, shows weakness." "We also can't go to war over one girl," another countered. "The South has 3 times our numbers. We'd be slaughtered." "Then what do you suggest?" Aldrich snapped. "Because sitting here arguing isn't helping." Draven stood at the head of the table, silent, his expression unreadable. He'd been listening for the past 10 minutes, letting them fight it out. Now he spoke. "We're not handing her over, and we're not going to war, not yet." Every eye turned to him. "Then what's your plan, my lord?" Aldrich asked, his tone skeptical. Draven's gaze flicked to Alara, who stood in the corner, quiet and watchful. "We negotiate," he said, "but on our terms. Alara will meet with their envoy, here in the fortress, under controlled conditions. She'll answer their questions, and in return they withdraw their forces and wait for a formal hearing in neutral territory." "You're giving them exactly what they want," Aldrich said flatly. "No. I'm giving them the illusion of what they want. while we figure out their real game. Draven leaned forward, his hands braced on the table. Someone inside this fortress is feeding them information. That's the only way they could have known about the ritual. We use this meeting to flush them out. One of the younger councilmen frowned. How? We feed false information to specific people, different versions to different council members. See which version makes it to the Southern envoy. Draven's smile was cold. Whoever's version shows up is our spy. Aldrich's expression shifted to grudging respect. That could work. It will work, Draven said with finality, but it requires everyone in this room to cooperate. Can I count on you? The councilmen exchanged glances. Slowly, one by one, they nodded. Good. Draven straightened. Prepare the Great Hall. We meet with the envoy in 2 hours, and someone find out everything you can about their leader. I want to know who we're dealing with. The room emptied quickly, leaving only Draven and Alara. She approached the table, her heart still racing. That was risky. Everything about this situation is risky. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. But you were right. Hiding won't work. We need to face this head on. What if they don't accept the terms? Then we fight. His eyes met hers, dark and determined. But I meant what I said, Alara. If they try to take you by force, there will be war. I don't care about the cost. The weight of that promise settled over her, terrifying and comforting in equal measure. I hope it doesn't come to that, she whispered. So do I. Two hours later, Alara stood in the great hall, dressed in borrowed finery that felt like armor. A deep blue gown, lined with silver thread. Her white hair was braided back, revealing the mark on her forearm, no longer hidden, but displayed like a banner. Draven stood beside her, every inch the warrior king. The council flanked them on both sides, a united front. The doors opened. The Southern envoy entered. There were 20 of them, too many for a simple diplomatic mission, all armed, all dangerous. They moved with military precision, their eyes scanning the room for threats. And at their head walked a man who made Alara's blood run cold. He was tall, aristocratic, with silver hair and eyes like chips of ice. His clothing was expensive, southern silk and northern fur, a deliberate statement. Power and wealth and ruthlessness, all wrapped in a veneer of civility. King Draven, the man said, his voice smooth as oil. Thank you for seeing us. Lord Corwin, Draven replied, his tone neutral. I wasn't aware the Southern Territories sent envoys without advance notice. Corwin smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. These are unusual circumstances, I'm sure you understand. I understand you've brought an army to my gates and demanded I hand over a guest under my protection. Draven's voice hardened. That's not a diplomatic approach, Corwin. That's a threat. Not a threat. A request. Corwin's gaze slid to Alara, and she felt his assessment like a physical touch. Cold, calculating, measuring her worth. Is this the girl? Her name is Alara Voss, Draven said, and she's agreed to answer your questions. Here, under my supervision. How generous. Corwin stepped closer, his eyes never leaving Alara. Tell me, Miss Voss, do you know why we've come for you? Alara lifted her chin, refusing to show fear. You think I'm a threat. We know you're a threat. Corwin gestured to one of his men, who stepped forward carrying a leather satchel. We have evidence that you were planted in the north as part of a conspiracy to destabilize the region. Documents, testimonies, proof. He pulled a sheaf of papers from the satchel, spreading them on the nearest table. Draven moved to examine them, his expression darkening with every page. These are forgeries, he said flatly. Are they? Corwin's smile widened. Or are you simply unwilling to see the truth? That this girl, this Omega, has been lying to you from the start? I haven't lied about anything, Alara said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. Haven't you? Corwin pulled another document from the satchel. This one older, more worn. This is a contract signed by your mother 23 years ago, selling you to a southern lord in exchange for protection and gold. The same lord who happens to be one of my closest allies. Lara's stomach dropped. That's impossible, she breathed. Is it? Corwin's eyes gleamed with triumph. Your mother was a servant, yes, but she was also a debtor, desperate, willing to do anything to survive, including selling her unborn child. You're lying, Draven growled. I wish I were. Corwin's expression turned almost sympathetic. But the truth is, Miss Voss has been a pawn her entire life, a tool carefully shaped and positioned for this exact moment. The white hair, the Voss name, even the abandonment in the snow, all carefully orchestrated to gain your sympathy, your trust, your protection. By who? Ilara demanded, her voice shaking. Who would go to that much trouble? Corwin leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Your father. The world stopped. Ilara couldn't breathe, couldn't think. My father is dead. Your father, Corwin said slowly, savoring every word, is Lord Theron Ashfeld, one of the most powerful men in the Southern Territories, and he's been waiting 23 years to claim you. The great hall erupted, councilmen shouted, guards moved forward. Draven's hand went to his sword, but Ilara just stood there, frozen, as everything she thought she knew shattered around her. You're lying, she whispered. You have to be lying. Corwin pulled one final document from the satchel. A portrait. Aged, faded, but unmistakable. A man with white hair and gray eyes, standing beside a woman who looked exactly like Ilara's mother. He's been looking for you, Corwin said softly. And now that we've found you, he's coming to take you home. Ilara's knees buckled. Draven caught her before she fell, his arms wrapping around her, his voice a low growl in her ear. Don't believe him. This is a manipulation, a trap. But what if it's true? She whispered. Then we deal with it, together. Corwin straightened, his expression hardening. King Draven, I'm giving you one final chance. Hand over Ilara Voss willingly, and we'll leave in peace. Refuse, and my orders are to take her by force. The choice is yours. Draven's hand moved to his sword. Around the hall, his soldiers did the same. The air crackled with violence, waiting to be unleashed, and Ilara realized with crystal clarity that whatever happened next would determine not just her fate, but the fate of the entire North. She pulled away from Draven, stepping forward. I'll go, she said. Ilara, no. Draven reached for her. I'll go, she repeated, louder. But not as a prisoner, as a guest. I want to meet this man who claims to be my father. I want to hear his story, and then I'll decide for myself what's true. Corwin's smile was victorious. A wise choice. But, Ilara continued, her voice hardening, King Draven comes with me, and if you refuse, then you prove you're lying. Because a father who truly cared about his daughter wouldn't deny her the protection she's chosen. The envoy leader's smile faltered. That's not... Those are my terms. Ilara's eyes burned into his. Take them or leave them. A long, tense silence. Then Corwin inclined his head. Very well. You and the king may travel south, under guard, of course, for everyone's safety. Of course, Draven said coldly. Corwin gestured to his men. We leave at first light. I suggest you both rest well tonight. The journey will be long. He turned and swept from the hall, his entourage following. The moment the doors closed, Draven rounded on Ilara. What were you thinking? He demanded. I was thinking that if I refused, people would die, she shot back, and that the only way to find out the truth is to face it. You're walking into a trap. Maybe, but I'm walking into it with my eyes open, and with you beside me. She met his gaze, unflinching. You said we'd face this together. I'm holding you to that. Draven stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly, his expression shifted from anger to something else, something that looked almost like pride. You're either the bravest person I've ever met, he said quietly, or the most reckless. Can I be both? Despite everything, his mouth quirked into an almost smile. Apparently, he pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers. If we're doing this, we do it smart. We gather intelligence. We find allies. And the moment things go wrong, we fight, Ilara finished. We fight. They stood there wrapped in each other, as the weight of what was coming settled over them both. Tomorrow, they would ride south into enemy territory, into the heart of a conspiracy that had been decades in the making, into a truth that could destroy everything. But tonight, they had each other. And for now, that was enough. They left Iron Peak at dawn, under a sky the color of old bruises. Alara sat astride a borrowed horse, flanked on all sides by Southern guards who watched her like hawks circling prey. Draven rode beside her, close enough that their knees nearly touched, his presence a constant reminder that she wasn't alone. Behind them came a small contingent of Northern soldiers, 20 men handpicked by Draven himself. Not enough to win a fight, but enough to make a statement. The journey south was brutal. 3 days of riding through mountain passes still choked with snow, across frozen rivers, through forests so dense the sun barely penetrated. Alara's body ached, her hands were raw from gripping the reins, but she never complained, never slowed, never gave the Southern guards the satisfaction of seeing her break. Corwin rode at the front of the column, occasionally glancing back with that same calculating expression. He hadn't spoken to her since they left the fortress, which suited Alara fine. Every word from his mouth felt like poison. On the second night, they made camp in a clearing surrounded by ancient pines. Fires were lit, sentries posted. The Northern and Southern soldiers kept to opposite sides of the camp, the divide between them as clear as a battle line. Alara sat near one of the fires, wrapped in furs, staring into the flames. She couldn't stop thinking about the portrait, the man with white hair, the woman who looked like her mother. "You're quiet." Draven's voice pulled her from her thoughts. He settled beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth. "Too quiet." "I'm thinking." Dangerous habit. His mouth quirked slightly, but the humor didn't reach his eyes. "Talk to me." Alara was silent for a long moment, then quietly, "What if he's telling the truth? What if this Lord Ashfeld really is my father? Then we deal with it." "How?" She turned to face him, and the vulnerability in her voice made her hate herself. "How do I deal with finding out my entire life was a lie? That my mother sold me before I was even born? That I was, what? A political experiment? A tool?" Draven's jaw tightened. "You're not a tool. You're a person. And whatever your mother did or didn't do doesn't define you. You define yourself." "Do I?" Alara's laugh was bitter. "Because right now it feels like everyone else is defining me. The council, the Southern lords, even you in a way. I'm the lost heir, the political pawn, the girl with the mark. But who am I really? You're the woman who refused to die in a storm." Draven's voice was fierce, his eyes burning into hers. "You're the one who stood up to mercenaries, who faced down a council full of alphas who wanted you gone, who made a choice to walk into enemy territory because you knew it was the only way to protect people you barely know." He leaned closer, his hand finding hers. "That's who you are, Alara. A survivor. A fighter. Someone who makes impossible choices and somehow makes them work." Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "What if I can't make this one work?" "Then we improvise." His thumb brushed over her knuckles. "Together." A twig snapped nearby. Both of them tensed, hands moving instinctively toward weapons. But it was only Marin, emerging from the shadows, with a small bundle in her hands. "Relax," the healer said dryly. "I'm not here to assassinate anyone, though the way you two are sitting, you might want to be more careful. The Southern guards are already whispering about the king's interest in his ward." Alara pulled her hand away from Draven's, heat rising in her cheeks. Marin ignored the reaction, settling beside the fire. "I brought you something." She unwrapped the bundle, revealing a small leather journal and a charcoal pencil. "Found it in one of the supply packs. Thought you might want it." "Why?" Alara asked, confused. "Because when we get to the Southern territories, you're going to need to be sharp, observant, and the best way to process information is to write it down." Marin pressed the journal into Alara's hands. "Document everything. Names, faces, conversations, especially anything that contradicts Corwin's story. If they're lying, and I suspect they are, the truth will be in the details." Draven nodded slowly. "That's good advice." "I know." Marin rose, brushing snow from her cloak. "Get some sleep, both of you. Tomorrow's going to be worse." She disappeared back into the darkness, leaving them alone again. Alara opened the journal, running her fingers over the blank pages. a small thing. But in a situation where she had almost no control, it felt like power. "Thank you," she said softly. Draven glanced at her. "For what?" "For not giving up on me." His expression softened. "I couldn't even if I wanted to." They sat in silence, watching the fire burn low, both acutely aware that this might be the last moment of peace they'd have for a very long time. The Southern Territories were nothing like the North. Where Iron Peak was all stone and ice and brutal functionality, the South was opulence and warmth and carefully cultivated beauty. They passed through villages with cobblestone streets and flower boxes, estates with manicured gardens even in winter, markets overflowing with goods, silks, spices, fruits Alara had never seen before. It was wealth built on the backs of people like her mother, servants, laborers, the invisible ones who kept the machinery of luxury running. And at the heart of it all was Thornhaven, Lord Ashfeld's estate. It rose from the landscape like something out of a dream. White stone walls, tall windows, towers capped with silver, gardens sprawling in every direction, pathways lined with marble statues. It was beautiful and terrifying. "Welcome," Corwin said as they passed through the gates. His smile was triumphant. "To your new home." Alara's stomach churned. This wasn't home. Home was... Actually, she didn't know what home was. She'd never had one. They were escorted through the main entrance into a grand hall that made Iron Peak's great room look modest by comparison. Crystal chandeliers, tapestries woven with gold thread. Floors so polished, Alara could see her reflection. And at the far end, standing beside a roaring fireplace, was a man with white hair. Lord Theron Ashfeld. He was older than this portrait, maybe 50, with lines etched deep around his eyes and mouth. But the resemblance was undeniable. The hair, the eyes, the sharp angles of his face. He looked exactly like Alara. Her breath caught. Theron's expression transformed when he saw her. Something raw and desperate flashed across his features. Grief, longing, hope all tangled together. "Alara," he breathed. She stood frozen, unable to speak, unable to move. Draven's hand found the small of her back, steadying her. Theron's gaze flicked to the king, his expression hardening slightly. "King Draven, thank you for bringing her safely." "I didn't bring her for you," Draven said coldly. "I brought her so she could hear the truth, whatever that is." "The truth." Theron's smile was sad. "Yes, I imagine you've heard many versions by now." He gestured to a cluster of chairs near the fire. "Please, sit. We have much to discuss." They settled into an uneasy arrangement. Theron in one chair, Alara and Draven in two others, with Corwin and a handful of guards hovering nearby like vultures. "Where do I begin?" Theron said, more to himself than anyone else. "I suppose at the beginning? 24 years ago, I fell in love with a woman I shouldn't have. Your mother, Alara, Senna." The name hit Alara like a physical blow. Her mother had never spoken her own name, just mother, always mother. "She was a servant in my household," Theron continued. "Beautiful, kind, and completely unsuitable for someone of my station. My family forbade the relationship, threatened to disown me if I pursued it, so we kept it secret. For 3 years we loved in the shadows." His voice cracked slightly. "And then she became pregnant." Alara's hands clenched in her lap. "My family found out. They demanded I cast her aside. Marry someone appropriate, produce a legitimate heir. When I refused," Theron's expression darkened. "They took matters into their own hands. They paid someone to make Sina disappear, told me she'd left willingly, taken money, and run." "But she didn't," Alara whispered. "No, she ran to protect you because my family wasn't just trying to remove her. They wanted to eliminate any claim you might have to the Ashfeld bloodline. To them, you were a stain, a threat. So Senna fled north, changed her name, and hid." Theron leaned forward, his eyes glistening. "I spent 20 years searching for her, for you. And by the time I found her, she was dying," Alara finished, her voice hollow. She remembered. The wasting sickness that had taken her mother slowly, painfully. The way she'd refused to speak about the past, even at the end. Theron nodded. "She made me promise not to contact you, said you were safer not knowing, that my family would only use you as they'd tried to use her. But I couldn't let it go." So I've been watching, waiting. And when I learned about the mark, about your connection to Luna Kalin's bloodline, I knew it was time. Time for what? Draven demanded. To bring her home, to acknowledge her, to give her what should have always been hers. Theron's gaze locked on Alara. You are my daughter, my only child, and I want to make things right. The words should have been comforting, should have been everything Alara had wanted to hear her entire life, but all she felt was cold. If you wanted to make things right, she said slowly, why send mercenaries? Why hire raiders to attack Iron Peak? Why all the manipulation and lies? Theron's expression tightened. I didn't send mercenaries. He's lying, Draven said flatly. I'm not. Theron's voice hardened. Alara, you have to understand, there are forces at play here bigger than just us. My family. The Southern Lords. They don't want you alive because it complicates their plans for succession, for power. When I found out you'd survived the caravan abandonment, I knew they'd try again, so I sent Corwin to retrieve you before they could. Retrieve, Alara repeated, the word bitter on her tongue. Like I'm a lost piece of property. Like you're my daughter who's in danger. Theron rose, his composure cracking. Every moment you spend in the north, you're a target. Here, under my protection, you're safe. Safe? Alara stood as well, her voice rising. You call forcing me south at sword point safe? You call turning the north against Draven to isolate me safe? I call it necessary. Theron's eyes were desperate now. You don't understand the stakes, Alara. If the wrong people find out what you are, what you represent, then let them come. The words came out fierce, surprising even herself. I'm tired of hiding, tired of being afraid, tired of everyone deciding what's best for me without asking what I want. What do you want? Theron asked quietly. Alara looked at Draven, at the man who'd pulled her from the snow, who'd stood beside her when everyone else wanted her gone, who'd ridden into enemy territory because she'd asked him to. Then she looked back at Theron. I want the truth, she said. All of it. No more half-stories, no more convenient lies. Who hired the mercenaries? Who abandoned me in the storm? And why now, after 23 years of silence, does everyone suddenly care about the lost Voss heir? Theron opened his mouth to respond, and the door burst open. A woman swept in, regal and cold, her hair iron gray and her eyes sharp as knives. She was followed by 3 men in expensive clothing, all bearing the same aristocratic features. Enough of this charade, the woman said, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. Theron went pale. Mother, you weren't supposed to. Supposed to what? Sit quietly while you legitimize a bastard and ruin everything we've worked for? The woman's gaze swept over Alara with open disdain. This is the great lost heir? This frightened little Omega? Alara's spine straightened. Who are you? Lady Marjorie Ashfeld, matriarch of this house, and the person who's going to explain to you exactly why you're worthless. She circled Alara like a predator. You think having white hair and a convenient mark makes you special? You're a pawn, child, nothing more. Created and positioned specifically to destabilize the Northern Territories and give us leverage in the trade negotiations. Created? Draven's voice was deadly soft. Marjorie smiled. Did you think it was coincidence that Theron's servant bore a child with Voss blood? That the caravan just happened to abandon her in the perfect location for the Northern King to find? That mercenaries conveniently attacked at exactly the right moment to force your hand? Alara felt the ground shifting beneath her. What are you saying? I'm saying your mother wasn't random. She was chosen, specifically bred from a minor Voss line we'd been tracking for generations, then placed in Theron's path. The pregnancy was planned. Your entire existence was designed to be a weapon we could deploy when needed. That's insane, Alara breathed. That's strategy. Marjorie's smile widened. And it worked beautifully. You're here, Draven's compromised. The North is fractured. And now, she gestured to her sons, now we remove the inconvenient variable. The 3 men moved forward, drawing weapons. Draven's sword was out in a heartbeat, placing himself between them and Alara. Touch her and die. How noble, Marjorie said. But you're outnumbered, King. You're 20 soldiers against my 100. Surrender the girl, return north, and we'll call this a diplomatic misunderstanding. Refuse, and you'll have war, Draven finished. I'm aware of the threat. Then make the smart choice. Draven's grip on his sword didn't waver. I am. The room crackled with violence waiting to be unleashed, and Alara realized something. They were all wrong about her. Marjorie thought she was a frightened pawn. Theron thought she was a daughter who needed rescuing. Even Draven, in his way, saw her as someone to protect. But she wasn't any of those things. She was the White Wolf Queen's heir, and it was time to act like it. Alara stepped forward, placing herself between Draven and Marjorie. Ignoring the shock on every face, she raised her left arm, displaying the Luna's seal. You made a mistake, she said, her voice ringing through the hall. You thought creating me made you powerful, but you forgot one thing. What's that? Marjorie asked, amused. You can't control what you don't understand. Alara's eyes blazed. You bred me for Voss blood, but you didn't know what that blood carried. Luna Kalin wasn't just a queen, she was a seer. A woman who could see truth through lies, who could command loyalty with nothing but her will, who united the North when everyone said it was impossible. She took another step forward, and Marjorie actually stepped back. And I carry that same blood, which means I see exactly what you are. Not a matriarch, not a strategist, just a desperate woman clinging to power she's terrified of losing. Because you've always known, that legitimacy trumps scheming. And I am legitimate. Marjorie's composure cracked. You're nothing but proof, Alara interrupted. Proof that your family's claim to power is built on manipulation and murder. Proof that the Southern territories have been undermining the North for generations. And proof that when given the choice between protecting a pawn and doing what's right, you'll choose power every time. She turned to Theron, whose face had gone ashen. Did you know? About what she did? No, he whispered. I swear I didn't. But you suspected, and you stayed silent because it was easier than standing up to her. Alara's voice softened slightly. You may be my father, but you're not my family, because family doesn't stay silent when someone they love is being used. She turned to Draven, who was watching her with something like awe. We're leaving, she said simply. They won't let us walk out of here, Draven replied. Yes, they will. Alara faced Marjorie again. Because I'm going to make them an offer they can't refuse. The matriarch's eyes narrowed. What kind of offer? I'll renounce any claim to the Ashfeld name and estates, publicly, in front of witnesses. In exchange, you withdraw all agents from the North, cease all sabotage efforts, and sign a formal treaty recognizing Northern autonomy in the Mountain Territories. That's absurd, one of Marjorie's sons sputtered. We'd be giving up everything. No, you'd be avoiding war. Alara's voice was steel. Because if you refuse, I go north and tell everyone exactly what you did. How you manipulated bloodlines, murdered my mother, and tried to use me as a weapon. The Southern Lords might tolerate your scheming now, but they won't tolerate treason. And creating a false heir to destabilize an allied territory? That's treason. Marjorie's jaw clenched. You have no proof. Don't I? Alara pulled the journal from her pocket. The one Marin had given her. I've been documenting everything, every conversation, every contradiction in Corwin's story, every detail about how the mercenaries knew exactly where to find me, exactly when to attack. And I have witnesses who'll testify that this household has been monitoring Northern politics with unusual interest for decades. It was a bluff. The journal had barely 3 pages of notes. But Marjorie didn't know that. The matriarch's expression cycled through rage, calculation, and finally, reluctant respect. You're more clever than I gave you credit for, she said softly. I had good teachers. Alara glanced at Draven. People who showed me that survival isn't just about being strong. It's about knowing when to fight and when to force your enemies to choose between 2 losses. Marjorie was silent for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. Very well, I accept your terms. But understand, girl, if you ever change your mind about that renunciation, if you ever try to claim Ashfeld resources or legitimacy, you'll do nothing, Alara interrupted, because I'll have already released everything I know to every major house in the South. My silence for your compliance, that's the deal. Another silence. Then Marjorie smiled, a real smile this time, cold but genuine. Perhaps you are Luna Kalen's heir after all, she said. Very well. Corwin will draw up the treaties. You'll sign in the morning in front of neutral witnesses, and then you leave. Forever. Agreed. Marjorie swept from the room, her sons following. The threat of violence dissipated like smoke. Theron remained, looking broken. Alara, don't. She held up a hand. You chose your family over me before I was born. I'm just making it official. I wanted to know you, he said desperately. To give you a chance. You wanted to ease your guilt. There's a difference. Alara's voice was tired now, all the fight draining out of her. Goodbye, Lord Ashfeld. She walked past him without looking back. Draven followed, his hand finding hers as they moved through the corridors toward their assigned quarters. Only when the door closed behind them did Alara allow herself to collapse. Draven caught her, lowering them both to the floor, holding her as tremors racked her body. That was incredible, he murmured into her hair, and absolutely terrifying. I was bluffing most of it, she admitted, her voice muffled against his chest. I know, but they didn't. That's what matters. He pulled back slightly, tilting her face up. You just outmaneuvered one of the most powerful families in the South, without an army, without political backing, with nothing but your mind and your courage. And you beside me. Always. The word was a promise. But Alara, you did this, not me. You. The weight of it settled over her. She'd spent her whole life being told she was worthless, being treated like she didn't matter. And now she'd forced a matriarch to bend, exposed a conspiracy, secured peace between territories that had been on the brink of war. She'd done that. What happens now? She whispered. Now we go home, Draven said, back to Iron Peak, where you belong. Home. The word still felt foreign, but looking at Draven, seeing the pride and warmth in his eyes, she thought maybe she could learn what it meant. They signed the treaties at dawn in a formal ceremony attended by neutral arbiters from 3 other southern houses. Alara's hand shook as she wrote her name, renouncing any claim to the Ashfeld estates. But with each letter, she felt lighter, freer. She wasn't anyone's pawn anymore. They rode north immediately, with Marjorie's promise that safe passage would be guaranteed. The journey back was faster, lighter, the tension that had suffocated them on the way south now replaced with something that felt almost like victory. On the 3rd day, they crested a ridge and saw Iron Peak in the distance, dark stone rising from white snow, solid and eternal. Alara's breath caught. It looked like fortress, like safety, like home. As they approached the gates, she saw figures gathering on the walls. The council. Soldiers. Merrin. The gates opened, and Aldrich stood at the threshold, his expression inscrutable. Draven dismounted first, helping Alara down. They walked together through the gates, into the courtyard, where the entire garrison seemed to have assembled. Aldrich stepped forward. For a long moment, he simply studied Alara. Then, slowly, deliberately, he dropped to one knee. Forgive me, he said. I doubted you, questioned your loyalty, saw you as a threat. He looked up and there was respect in his cold eyes now. But you've proven yourself. Not just to me, to everyone. You walked into enemy territory and came back with peace. That's something even the greatest warriors couldn't accomplish. One by one, the other council members knelt. Then the soldiers. Then everyone. Alara stood frozen, overwhelmed, as an entire fortress acknowledged her, not as a pawn, not as a tool, but as someone worthy of respect. Draven's hand found hers, squeezing gently. Welcome home, he murmured. And for the first time in her life, Alara believed it. She was home. The words echoed through Alara's mind as she stood in the courtyard, surrounded by kneeling soldiers and councilmen who had once wanted her gone. The weight of their acknowledgement pressed down on her, not crushing, but grounding. Real, undeniable. Draven's hand remained in hers, steady and warm. Rise, he commanded, his voice carrying across the courtyard. All of you. They obeyed, but the change in how they looked at her remained. No more suspicion, no more contempt, just respect, hard-won and genuine. Aldrich approached, his expression still unreadable, but softer somehow. We need to debrief, The council should hear everything that happened in the South. Agreed, Draven said. But first, he glanced at Alara, and she saw the concern beneath his commanding exterior. Alara needs rest. The journey was long. I'm fine, she protested, though exhaustion was already creeping into her bones. You're not. Marin materialized from the crowd, her weathered face stern. You've been riding for days, negotiating with vipers, and holding yourself together through sheer willpower. You need food, warmth, and sleep, in that order. Alara wanted to argue, but the healer's expression brooked no disagreement. And truthfully, she was right. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the confrontation with Marjorie was fading, leaving behind bone-deep weariness. All right, she conceded, but I want to attend the council meeting. Whatever happens next affects me too. Aldrich nodded slowly. Fair enough. We'll reconvene in 3 hours. That should give you time to recover. The crowd dispersed, returning to their duties. Marin guided Alara toward the main keep, Draven following close behind. You handled that well, the healer said as they climbed the stone stairs. The courtyard acknowledgement. Some people would have let it go to their heads. I just want to understand what it means, Alara admitted. They knelt. But why? Because I secured peace, or because they finally believe I'm not a threat? Both. And because you proved something they needed to see. Marin pushed open the door to Alara's chambers, the same room she'd woken in after nearly freezing to death. It felt like a lifetime ago. You proved that strength isn't just about fighting, it's about choosing the right battle, and winning it without bloodshed. She left to fetch food, and Draven closed the door behind her. Alone at last, Alara felt her composure finally crack. Her legs gave out, and she sank onto the bed, her whole body trembling. Draven was there instantly, kneeling in front of her, his hands framing her face. Talk to me, he said softly. I don't know what I'm feeling, she whispered. Relief? Terror? I forced one of the most powerful families in the South to back down, secured peace, and exposed a conspiracy. But it doesn't feel like victory. It feels like survival. She nodded, tears finally spilling over. Draven pulled her against him, and she buried her face in his shoulder, letting everything she'd been holding back pour out. The fear, the exhaustion. The weight of discovering her entire existence had been manufactured. The loss of a father she'd never really had. He held her through it all, solid and unshakable, his hand stroking her hair. You're allowed to break, he murmured. You've earned it. I can't afford to break, not when there's still so much to figure out. Then break here, with me, where no one else can see. His arms tightened around her. And tomorrow, we'll figure out the rest, together. The words settled over her like a blanket. Together, not alone anymore. She pulled back slightly, meeting his gaze. Why did you come with me? To the South. You could have sent someone else. Could have stayed here where it was safe. Because leaving you to face that alone was never an option. His thumb brushed away her tears. From the moment I found you in the snow, Alara, something changed. I don't have words for it, but I knew that your fate and mine were connected. And I was right. What if it's just circumstance, she asked quietly. What if we're only drawn together because of the situation, and once things settle, it fades? Draven's smile was soft, almost sad. Do you really believe that? She thought about the question, about the way her heart steadied when he was near, the way she'd instinctively reached for him during the confrontation with Marjorie, the way he'd stood beside her when everyone else saw her as a problem to solve. No, she whispered. I don't. He leaned forward, pressing his forehead to hers. Neither do I. A knock interrupted the moment. Marin entered with a tray laden with bread, meat, cheese, and hot soup. She set it down without comment, though her knowing look suggested she'd seen more than she let on. Eat. Both of you, she ordered. Then rest. The council can wait. 3 hours later, Alara entered the war room feeling steadier. The food and brief rest had helped, though the exhaustion still lingered at the edges of her awareness. The council was already assembled, all 5 members, plus Draven at the head of the table. They stood when she entered, a mark of respect that still felt surreal. Sit, Draven said, gesturing to the empty chair beside him. Alara took it, acutely aware of every eye on her. Aldrich leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. Tell us everything, from the moment you entered Thornhaven to the treaty signing. Leave nothing out. So she did. She spoke about Theron's confession, about Marjorie's revelation that her entire existence had been orchestrated, about the confrontation, the bluff with the journal, the terms she'd negotiated. The council listened in tense silence, their expressions growing darker with each detail. When she finished, one of the younger councilmen, the sharp-featured one, spoke first. If what you're saying is true, the Southern Territories have been manipulating Northern politics for decades, maybe longer. It's true, Draven confirmed. I witnessed all of it. Aldrich's expression was grim. This changes everything. The trade agreements, the border disputes, the political marriages, all of it was designed to weaken us. And now they've backed off, another councilman said. Because of her. He gestured to Alara. We have peace, real peace, for the first time in a generation. Temporary peace, Aldrich corrected. Marjorie Ashfeld isn't the type to honor agreements unless it benefits her. The moment she finds an advantage, she'll break the treaty. Then we make sure she never finds that advantage, Draven said. We fortify our borders, strengthen our alliances, and we make it clear that any breach of the treaty will be met with immediate and overwhelming retaliation. And what about her? Aldrich's gaze shifted to Alara. Her existence is still a complication. The Southern Lords know about the Luna's seal. They know she carries a bloodline that predates our current ruling structure. What's to stop them from trying to use that information against us? Nothing, Alara said quietly, which is why I need to make a public declaration. The room went silent. Draven frowned. What kind of declaration? Alara took a breath, steadying herself. I renounced my claim to the Ashfeld name and estates, but I haven't addressed my connection to Luna Kalen's bloodline, to the Northern Territories. And until I do, there will always be questions, doubts, people wondering if I'm a threat to the current ruling structure. What are you proposing? Aldrich asked carefully. I'm proposing I formally acknowledge my heritage, but not as a challenge to King Draven's authority, as a confirmation of it. She met Draven's gaze. Luna Kalen ruled alongside her mate. She didn't seize power, she shared it, created a partnership that made the North stronger. I want to do the same. The implication hung in the air. One of the councilmen cleared his throat. You're suggesting a formal alliance, a marriage. I'm suggesting a choice, Alara corrected, not one made out of political necessity or manipulation, but one made freely, by both parties. Draven's expression was unreadable. And if I refuse? Then I step back, renounce any connection to the throne, live quietly as a citizen of Iron Peak. But either way, the question of my bloodline needs to be addressed publicly, clearly, so there's no room for others to exploit it. Aldrich studied her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled, a real smile, without coldness or calculation. You've learned quickly, he said. Most people would have demanded power. You're offering to give it away in exchange for stability. That's wisdom. That's survival, Alara replied. I spent my whole life watching people destroy each other fighting for scraps of power. I don't want to repeat their mistakes. Another councilman nodded slowly. If we move forward with this, a formal announcement, a public ceremony, it sends a strong message. Unity, continuity, the North standing together. It also gives legitimacy to Draven's rule, Aldrich added. If the Luna's heir acknowledges his authority, it reinforces his position against any internal challenges. And it gives Alara protection, Draven said, his voice firm. As long as she's formally tied to the throne, attacking her means attacking the entire Northern Alliance. Even Marjorie Ashfeld won't risk that. He turned to Alara, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. But before we make any political decisions, he said quietly, I need to know what you want. Not as Luna Kalen's heir, not as a political asset, as Alara. What do you want? The question stripped away everything else, the bloodlines, the politics, the weight of expectation, and left only the truth. She thought about the girl who'd lain in the snow, waiting to die because no one cared if she lived, about the woman who'd fought mercenaries, negotiated with vipers, and refused to be used as a weapon. And she thought about the man who'd pulled her from the storm and given her something she'd never had before, a choice. I want to stay, she said softly. Here, with you. Not because I have to, but because when I think about the future, about what home means, I see Iron Peak, I see the North, I see you. Something shifted in Draven's expression, relief and joy and fierce protectiveness all at once. Then stay, he said, not as an heir seeking power, not as an Omega needing protection, but as my equal, my partner, my queen. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Aldrich cleared his throat. Is that a formal proposal, my lord? Draven's mouth quirked slightly. It's a statement of intent. The formal proposal can wait until we're not surrounded by councilmen. A ripple of laughter broke the tension. Then we have a plan, Aldrich said, rising. We prepare a formal announcement. Invite representatives from all the allied houses. Make it a ceremony that cements both the political alliance and, he paused delicately, the personal one. How long? Draven asked. 2 weeks, maybe 3. We need time to prepare the fortress, send invitations, ensure security, especially after the mercenary attack. 3 weeks, Draven agreed. And in the meantime, we double security. No one enters Iron Peak without thorough vetting, and we finish identifying the spy who fed information to the south. About that, one of the councilmen pulled out a sealed document. We found him, one of the lower-ranking guards. He was passing messages through a contact in the trade city. We've had him in custody since you left. And, Draven's voice was cold, he confessed, said he was being paid by a southern broker, same one the mercenaries used. We've locked down his entire network. Execute him, Draven said flatly, publicly. Make it clear that betrayal has consequences. Alara's stomach turned, but she didn't protest. This was the harsh reality of ruling, of survival. Mercy had its place, but so did justice. The council meeting continued for another hour, working through logistics and contingencies. By the time they adjourned, darkness had fallen, and Alara's exhaustion had returned with a vengeance. Draven walked her back to her chambers, his presence a comfort in the shadowed corridors. Are you sure about this? He asked as they reached her door. The announcement, the ceremony. Once we move forward, there's no going back. I'm sure. She turned to face him fully. I spent my whole life being defined by other people's choices, their fears, their manipulation. This is the first time I get to choose for myself. And I'm choosing you, this life, this future. Draven's hand cupped her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. You realize this won't be easy. Being queen, the council will test you. The allied houses will scrutinize everything you do. And there will always be threats. I survived being abandoned in a blizzard, negotiated with a woman who wanted me dead, and walked into enemy territory armed with nothing but a bluff and a journal. Alara's smile was small but genuine. I think I can handle a few political challenges. He laughed, a real laugh, warm and unguarded. You're extraordinary, you know that? I'm learning. He leaned down, his lips brushing hers in a kiss that was soft and sweet and full of promise. Not the desperate kiss from the archive, not the stolen moment in the ceremonial chamber, but something deeper, something that spoke of tomorrows and choices freely made. When they pulled apart, both were breathless. 3 weeks, Draven murmured, and then you're mine, officially. I'm already yours, Alara replied. The ceremony just makes it public. His smile was bright enough to chase away the shadows. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of activity. The fortress transformed. Banners were hung, stones scrubbed clean, guest quarters prepared. Invitations went out to every allied house in the north, and responses flooded back, acceptances mostly, with carefully worded congratulations and thinly veiled curiosity. Alara found herself swept up in preparations she barely understood. Dress fittings, etiquette lessons from Marin, who proved surprisingly knowledgeable about court protocol. Meetings with the allied lords who arrived early, each one assessing her with varying degrees of skepticism and approval. She hated every minute of it, or she thought she did, until Draven found her hiding in the archives one afternoon, surrounded by ancient texts and looking miserable. Running away? He asked, leaning against the doorframe. Strategically retreating, she corrected. There's a difference. He crossed to her, settling onto the floor beside her. What's wrong? I don't know how to be a queen, she admitted. Everyone keeps talking about protocols and traditions and expectations, and I don't fit. I'm a servant's daughter, an Omega who was supposed to freeze in the snow. How am I supposed to rule? The same way you've survived everything else, Draven said. By being yourself. By making choices that feel right, even when everyone says they're wrong. By trusting your instincts. He picked up one of the books she'd been reading, A History of Luna Kaelin's Reign. You know what made her a great queen? She didn't try to be what people expected. She created something new, something that worked because it was authentic. She also had visions, prophecies, actual powers. Ilara's laugh was bitter. I have a mark and a stubborn refusal to die. That's not exactly legendary material. Isn't it? Draven's eyes were serious. You've seen the fortress, Ilara. The way people look at you now. They're not seeing a pawn or a political tool. They're seeing someone who faced impossible odds and won. Someone who chose courage over safety. That's the kind of legend people follow. She wanted to believe him, but doubt was a hard habit to break. What if I fail? She whispered. Then we fail together. He took her hand, pressing it over his heart. And we get back up and try again. That's what partnership means. The simplicity of it broke something open inside her. She'd been so focused on living up to expectations, Luna Kaelin's legacy, the council's approval, the weight of history, that she'd forgotten the most important thing. She wasn't alone anymore. Thank you, she said softly. For what? For reminding me why I said yes. His smile was answer enough. The ceremony took place on the first day of spring, when the snow finally began to melt and the sun broke through weeks of gray sky. The great hall had been transformed. Banners of the northern houses lined the walls, colors and symbols representing decades of alliance. Torches blazed in silver holders. The stone floors had been covered in woven rugs, and the dais at the far end now held two thrones, one ancient and carved with wolves, the other new and crafted specifically for this day. Ilara stood in a sided chamber, staring at her reflection. The dress was white silk and silver thread, cut to flow like water, with long sleeves that covered the Luna's seal on her arm. Her hair, that distinctive white hair that had marked her as strange her entire life, was braided with winter flowers, falling in a cascade down her back. She looked like a queen. She felt like an imposter. Stop that, Marin said, appearing behind her. You're spiraling. I'm realistic. You're terrified. There's a difference. The healer adjusted the fall of Ilara's hair, her expression softening. I've seen a lot of people step into roles they weren't ready for. Most of them failed because they tried to be something they weren't. You won't fail, Ilara, because you're not pretending. How do you know? Because you're still you. Still the girl who hit a mercenary with a rock. Still the woman who bluffed her way past a matriarch. The dress and the crown don't change that. A knock sounded at the door. Aldrich stepped in, formal in ceremonial armor. It's time, he said. Ilara's heart hammered. I'm not ready. No one ever is. Aldrich's expression was surprisingly gentle. But for what it's worth, I believe you'll be a good queen. Not because of your bloodline, but because you've already proven you put the North above yourself. That's what matters. The words steadied her. She followed Aldrich into the corridor, and the sound of voices swelled. Hundreds of people packed into the great hall, all waiting to witness this moment. The doors opened. Every head turned. Ilara walked forward, her spine straight, her chin lifted, forcing herself to meet their stares. Representatives from every allied house. Soldiers who'd fought beside Draven for years. Common folk who'd been invited to witness history. And at the end of the long aisle, standing before the thrones, was Draven. He wore black and silver, his ceremonial armor polished to a mirror shine, a crown of twisted iron resting on his dark hair. He looked every inch the warrior king, but when his eyes met hers, she saw only the man who'd pulled her from the snow. She reached the dais and he extended his hand. She took it, and together they turned to face the assembled crowd. An elder from one of the oldest northern houses stepped forward, a man with a long white beard and ceremonial robes covered in runes. We gather today to witness an alliance, he intoned, his voice carrying through the hall. Not just between two people, but between past and future. between the blood of the White Wolf Queen and the strength of the Kyle line, between tradition and innovation. He gestured for them to kneel. Elara's legs shook, but she lowered herself to the cold stone, Draven mirroring her movement. The elder produced a silver circlet, delicate and ancient, etched with the same symbols that marked Elara's arm. "This crown belonged to Luna Kalin herself," he said. "Lost for centuries, found in the archives during preparations for this ceremony, a symbol returning to its rightful heir." He placed it on Elara's head, and she felt the weight of it, literal and metaphorical. "Elara Voss, do you swear to serve the Northern Territories with wisdom, courage, and compassion, to protect its people as they would protect you, to rule not for power, but for the good of all?" "I swear," she said, her voice steady. The elder turned to Draven. "Draven Kael, do you acknowledge this woman as your equal, your partner in ruling, your queen?" "I do." Draven's voice was fierce. "With everything I am." "Then by the authority of the Northern Houses, I pronounce you king and queen of the Northern Territories, united in purpose, united in rule, united in all things." The hall erupted in sound, cheers, applause, the pounding of weapons against shields. Draven stood, pulling Elara to her feet, and kissed her, deep and claiming and full of promise, in front of everyone. The crowd roared louder. When they broke apart, Elara was breathless and overwhelmed, and more certain than she'd ever been about anything. This was right. This was home. The celebration lasted 3 days. Feasts were held every night, with music and dancing and toasts that grew progressively more elaborate. The allied lords presented gifts, weapons, furs, pledges of continued loyalty. Common folk lined up to offer blessings and congratulations. And through it all, Elara learned. She learned the names of the houses, their histories and feuds. She learned which councilmen could be trusted and which needed watching. She learned how to navigate conversations that were half politics and half verbal sparring. She learned what it meant to be a queen. On the 4th day, after the last guests had departed and the fortress returned to relative quiet, Elara found herself in the archives again. Draven found her there, as she'd known he would. "Looking for something?" he asked, settling beside her. "Yes." She pulled a worn book from the shelf, the one containing Luna Kalin's genealogy. "I wanted to understand her, how she did it, how she went from being an outcast to a queen." Draven opened the book, scanning the faded text. "It says here she was considered cursed, that her white hair marked her as touched by darkness. Sound familiar?" Elara smiled sadly. "Very. But she didn't let other people's fear define her. She used it, turned it into strength." He pointed to a passage. "She told her people that being different wasn't a weakness. It was proof that she could see what they couldn't, that she could lead them places they were afraid to go." "And they believed her?" "Eventually. After she proved herself over and over, after she made hard choices and survived them, after she showed them that courage wasn't about being fearless, it was about being terrified and choosing to act anyway." Elara closed the book slowly. "That's what you see when you look at me, isn't it? Not a queen, just someone who's terrified but refuses to quit." "That is a queen," Draven said, "at least the kind worth following." She leaned against him, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "Do you think it'll work?" she asked quietly. "Us. This alliance. Can we actually unite the North in a way that lasts?" "I think," Draven said slowly, "that we have something Luna Kalin never had. We're choosing this, not because of prophecy or political necessity, but because we want to, and that makes all the difference." Elara thought about that, about the girl who'd been abandoned in the snow, who'd been told her whole life she was worthless, about the journey from that frozen wasteland to this moment, sitting in the heart of a fortress she could now call home, beside a man who'd chosen her when no one else would. "We're going to change things," she said. "The way Omegas are treated, the way the South exploits the North. All of it." "I know." Draven pressed a kiss to her temple. "And I'll be right there beside you, for all of it." Outside, spring was finally breaking through winter's grip. Snow melted, rivers thawed. The land that had been frozen and harsh was slowly coming back to life. Just like Elara. She'd survived the storm, survived the betrayal, survived discovering her entire existence had been manufactured by people who saw her as a tool. And now she was rewriting the story, not as a victim, not as a pawn, but as a queen who'd earned her crown through courage, cunning, and the simple refusal to give up. The North had a new ruler, and she was going to make sure everyone, from the highest lord to the lowest servant, knew that things were different now, that mercy and strength could coexist. That being underestimated was an advantage. That survival wasn't just about enduring, it was about choosing to fight for something better. Alara Voss, the girl no one wanted, had become the queen everyone needed, and her story, their story, was just beginning. The White Wolf had finally come home, and she was never leaving again.